Hello and welcome to our latest edition of Bulldogs Unleashed, and we have a cracking show for you today. Of course, as usual, joining us to talk about the upcoming events is Luke Goodwin. We have a special guest, one of the most famous fans of the Bulldogs Club, James Magnussen. And Maggie, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us,
Thanks,
mate.
Bill. Looking forward to it.
And one of our oldest legends. We had Gary Hughes on the other day, but I think Phil Young actually trumps Hughesy for being our oldest, longest standing Bulldogs player.
He won't be back.
I don't know how to put that in a nice way. I didn't put it. I didn't put it very well, Phil. It's good to see you still here after what I said.
Mate, I was feeling pretty good when I walked in here. Now I'm starting to feel extremely old.
Yeah. Anyway, who should I be to talk about that sort of thing? But anyway, also dropping in, Reni Maitua returns to the program as well. Got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the old days for sure. A lot of interesting conversation with James here today about preparing for big games, about team ethic and all those sorts of things. And he'll have an interesting perspective, of course, as a keen observer, not only of team sports and rugby league, but of course as a champion swimmer. So all that's ahead of us on the program. Some great memories from Phil. You won't believe some of the stories. If you can't remember the 70s or you have no idea what happened in the 70s, you will hear some interesting stuff. But in the meantime, let's look in the near future. Sunday, 2 p.m. at Accor Stadium, it's Newcastle. 2 weeks break for the club. First of all, Luke, what have they been doing? How did the bye work in for Cameron Ciraldo? Did he flog them or rest them?
No, we had 3 tough days at the end of last week and then gave him the weekend off. So it's always hard. We met as a coaching staff and we spoke about, what we wanted out of the week. We were going to go a bit tough and we were going to end maybe with some sandhills, but we just thought, where they were at halfway, through the season, a bit after halfway, and we just thought it wasn't best mentally and physically. We did have a great race day on Saturday, so a few of the boys and the staff attended that with our corporate partners, which was great. So, they're well rested. Had yesterday off too, and the boys are back in the training full on day today. So they looked, they look ready to go, well recovered.
We had the team list here, and there's a slight injury to Carlo Luapu. Is it long term? Doesn't sound like it.
Nah, he got a bit of a pinched nerve in his neck. If we need him to play, I reckon he could. But yeah, just there's no point rushing him back. He's a young kid. I just want to mention this week too, mate. Apart from being our old boys round at against Newcastle, it's also the Mark Hughes Foundation.
Yeah, very important.
We raise money for brain cancer, so hopefully everyone can support the good cause.
Get your beanie or donate. Beanies for brain cancer. The interesting thing about the lineup this week, boys, there's a squad of 23 as usual, but there are a few players outside the 17 that we haven't seen outside the 17 very often. Well, at least for Kyle Flanagan, of course, he's been in and out and then back in again. Corey Waddell, Braden Burns, Ray Faitala Mariner, all in the 23 but not the 17. Is this a rock-solid 17 that we see today, or is that subject to change?
Yeah, I think every coach plays a bit of trickery. I'm not sure, mate. Like I said, was picked. There are guys still with some niggles and stuff, but who I think,
That's Cameron Ciraldo, by the way, calling him up not to give anything away.
It's actually Reni. But, like I said, a few of the boys, some of the boys were challenged on the weekend in our New South Wales Cup team. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if some positions change, but it's above my pay rate, that one.
Okay, before we get on to one particular position that'll be interesting, and that's Khaled Rajeb. Not his first rodeo, but interesting to see him partnering with Matt Burton as a starter combination. But before we get to that, James, I mentioned earlier you work for SEN Radio now. We'll talk a bit about that a little later, as well as your other commitments. But you're observing the game very closely. You always have been a big fan of this club. Just your thoughts on the season so far, and try not to be too...
SEN hat off, Raj hat on. Look, it's been a roller coaster of a year, hasn't it? It's disappointing in that we haven't really had a fair crack with injuries. So it's kind of the season that could have been in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Poor Luke Thompson still hasn't had a chance to get back. That's a big part of our salary cap taken up there.
Tavita.
Tavita,
He got injured, and then you got Kicks is out for most of the year too.
Yeah, Ray Tala Mariner, Kikia. So it's just been a really hard season to kind of understand where is this club actually at.
Yeah.
Because we had some star signings that haven't been on the paddock. There was some positive signs early on, but obviously as we've gotten into the middle of this season, things have become pretty tough, and we've blooded some players that I'm sure Luke would agree we maybe wouldn't have blooded had we not had the injuries we've had. So you can find some positives in that blokes will have NRL experience going into next season that may not have otherwise. But look, to be completely honest, as a supporter, it's been another pretty tough season.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that, and I don't think anyone disagrees with that inside or outside the playing group either, or the coaching staff. Phil, James made a very good point. There are players out, significant players out. The injuries are all different. They're all kind of crazy. Ray had pneumonia, for goodness sake, all sorts of weird stuff. And sometimes it only takes one change to unpick a combination, or indeed one person to come back in and put a jigsaw together.
It can, yeah, but I think the most important thing this year is the coach. We all know he's a good coach, but I think he'll be a better coach next year on what he's had to go through this year and learn. He's had injuries, he's had a lot of mishaps. I guarantee if you sat down with him and asked him what would be the perfect Canterbury side, it's just hasn't happened for him. But I think he's learned a lot about himself, and I think he'll be a better coach next year for us.
That's a good point. I mean, we talk about the learning curve in the playing group, and it's not easy for a first-time coach to have to deal with what Ciro's dealt with.
Expected to have to deal with this. I mean, straight off the bat at the start of the season, if you go off the rich list that's just come out, you got Luke Thompson, Tavita Pengai Jr. and Billy Kikia. There's $2.4 million worth of salary cap.
Yeah,
that's more than a quarter of your salary cap this year that have actually probably never played a game. They haven't played a game together.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So what do you do?
Yeah, it's hard, and you're right. This is his first time as a coach, a head coach of an NRL organisation. So he's always been the good cop. He's never had to deal exactly what you said, James. He's never had to deal with a lot of this stuff. So it's all new to him, and we're there to. We know that as staff, so we're there to support him. And on the flip side of that, mate, I'm so grateful to work with him. I've worked with a few head coaches now here at the Bulldogs, and he's by far the best I've worked with. And not saying technical stuff wise, which I'm not going to judge any of the coaches here, because when you get to that standard, you've got something about you. But just the way he manages people away, and as you said, James, correctly, like every supporter, we thought we'd be a bit better than what we are, but the way he's got, and I speak about with Phil a lot, the way the club and the feeling in the club is still real positive and good because of the things he's put in place.
I think we're going to have a better person, a better coach.
Yeah. He's a great human.
And have those players on board that you said are injured and that, plus the coach being a better coach, I think we're going to have a good year next year.
Yeah. We just need to get him a hair dye sponsor, because those greys, they're coming through. I'll get you. Coaching.
I was going to say President, Prime Minister and football. President, Prime Minister and football coach. 3 jobs guaranteed to send you grey in no time flat. Quick thought about Newcastle. Would you believe it's such a compressed ladder even so? I think now we're getting a clearer picture of which teams are more likely to win at the end of the year, even if they're not all overly consistent at this time. Of course, we're in the middle of State of Origin now. We're just past the halfway mark of State of Origin. So there's all that to be factored in. But I think we're clearly seeing some really good sides emerging who look like premiership material, and others not so much, even though they might be only 2 points apart on the ladder. So what chances are of the Bulldogs, getting well clear, because the for and against is by far the worst in the comp due to a couple of blowouts. So, what chance of just getting out of that wooden spoon zone? So that's one thing we're not talking about. Yeah,
it's been a pretty indifferent season. Like, everyone's beating everyone, especially early on. Parramatta started with 0-6. So, but you're right, the cream's starting to rise a little bit. And Newcastle, they're playing okay football. Yeah, they've got some fair players in their squad. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge. But it's like the Bulldogs. If we turn up and play, We're a gritty, honest team. We'll compete with anybody.
This is one you got to circle on the calendar if you want to avoid that wooden spoon battle. This is one you got to circle on the calendar as not a must win, but
it's definitely winnable.
It's a realistic game that we can win. It's at home. Newcastle have fluctuated a little bit with form. A lot of that dependent on how Kalen Ponga plays, but winnable.
They're on an odd number of points. We jump over them.
Yeah.
If we win, so that's significant.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Phil, back in your day, how much ladder watching did you do? Everyone says, no, we take it one game at a time, all those things that the coach wants you to say. But was there much looking at that perspective, the context of the comp when you were playing?
Not really. We were basically Canterbury from the early 70s on. We're always up in the top 4, top 5. Because remember, you only had 5 sides in the semis to play in the semis then.
Yeah.
I think if you look at it from 70, 72, 73, all the way through there, we're always in the semis, which was the top 5.
It was just norm, wasn't it? It's like the 80s.
Yeah, and surprisingly, through those 70s, it was mostly all juniors.
Yeah.
90% of the side was juniors.
But I would reckon that would be a lot of the teams back in the day. A lot of the areas would have been just local juniors.
Yeah, probably.
Remember the import rule you used to have?
Probably basically South, St George, and probably us and Penrith.
Yeah.
But Manly bought players. Roosters bought players.
Roosters never had a junior in their lives.
Oh no, I'm sure somebody in the eastern
Paddington
suburbs
Colts.
of Sydney played rugby league when they were young.
Brian Fletcher, I think, is from the Paddington Colts. I'm pretty sure he told me that. Yeah.
There you go. Good on you, Fletch.
One and only. Brian Fletcher. Well done, Roosters.
But it does raise the interesting question too, mentioning juniors, about this, very noble attempt to create combinations between young players that they can grow up together with, as we saw with Penrith. We've seen it with other clubs over the years, and we've seen it especially in the old days because that's when it was more configured. It wasn't professional or as professional. So that was particularly relevant in the old days. And we'll talk about that with Phil, of course, a little later on. He actually played when he wasn't surfing, but a bit like Reni. But anyway, just quickly, the Ben Hunt thing. A player like Ben Hunt becoming available in this landscape just goes to show how important a tactical leader is, an experienced tactical leader. And even though you might want to form young combinations, if you want to actually, keep confidence in the side, you need some experience in there, and you need some tactical nous as well, surely, which is not easy to come by.
Oh, no, he's worth every cent. And working in the game and a franchise, you do know the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So, it's easy for all us sit here to comment about Ben and he shouldn't have done this or he should have stayed or whatever. There's so much more behind it. There's a lot more that goes into it. So, but I know it's out there. I know Gus, did meet with him, several times. So, quality players like that, don't come on the market much. And,
I think
we
what
speak
Ben,
about it,
I
Phil,
think
you
what
being
Ben
a
Hunt
7.
does on the field, he carries that much respect on the field that it's easy. It's not easy, but he can get the players around the field because if he tells them to go right or left, they just do it because they know he'll create something for them. He creates things and makes things happen.
Like they did for you, mate.
Yeah.
with your mullet flowing, you and Johnny Gibbs. But yeah, he's priceless.
Russell Fairfax.
Yeah. He would have been. He's and if St George can keep him, they're going to be okay.
See, there's very few halfbacks today that have got soft hands.
Yeah.
And
But even on the market,
he has got soft hands.
On the market, there's no good 7s on the market.
Well, West Tigers now are in the market, and there's just
Do you think that's because of the 10-metre rule, where we played under 5 metres, so it was fixed bayonets, and so we had to kind of play from a short distance, and they had that soft hands and that.
Yeah, true. Oh, look, there's probably a lot of stuff, but
or is it the coaches?
No. At the end of the day, there's going to be another good half out there. Someone's going to develop one. Hopefully, we do with Khaled and Carl. There's going to be always someone that steps in, but when they do, they tend to stay at that club.
Are they overcoached at a young age? You kind of indicated that, didn't you, Phil?
I think.
Are they too structured? Does that take away the creativity from a young age, or not? Are they still allowing that creativity up to a point? I don't know.
Depends on the coach and
Do you remember this is from a young age? I don't know if they still had this rule, but it used to be you'd wear a bib and it had to go dummy half to halfback.
Yeah, they still
and
got it now.
halfback had to pass it. The halfback couldn't run.
So it's got a DH and a FR, first receiver, dummy half.
Yeah. So the halfback couldn't run. So if you wanted to run, and
you get tackled to change over.
You wouldn't play
That's
halfback.
right.
So
Yeah,
that decentivizes the best players from wanting to play halfback at a young age. I think that would definitely play a role.
Yeah, they never had that back when I played in the 70s.
I think too many junior coaches coach the same way as first graders. And just in juniors, I think you should just let the kids run around and play football, you know. Create the imagination.
Well, I know
and just
Craig
let them
Wilson
play.
here who works for us. He has this pyramid, and it's it's split up into three. And at the bottom, the way like you just said, you've got the junior coaches now. So at the bottom, it's all about the fancy plays and NRL and in and out and get into a space on the field. Then it goes up, and then the top is fundamentals, where he flips it, where the fundamentals is the top. It's the foundation of building any
You let
good
the individual
organisation.
grow, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You let your natural abilities and that's the thing. I don't think enough coaches recognise natural ability in some kids and build on that natural ability, where a lot of it's kind of preset.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts.
The game is
That's
very
looking at it from an old man's point of view.
But to be fair,
Very
Phil,
old.
a lot of sports are going through that conversation.
Yeah.
A lot of sports, particularly the football codes, I think. And I don't know what the answer is, but I do know, being of that vintage of back in the old days, there was just, there wasn't that much regimentation to it. And your spare days were spent running around parks with your mates, throwing the ball around, and you learnt to run angles, and you learnt to sort of have peripheral vision and know when guys were changing angle or coming up on your shoulder and things like that. It was just all more natural. I don't know if I'm sure they still do that.
I'm pretty confident you'll see a change, right? A lot of these guys coming through now came through in the generation of structure. This is the Melbourne Storm style of football, which was, get to points on the field and get to your kick and pin them down. With the new rule changes, the 7 tackle sets, the 6 agains, this is going to change the type of football played, and that will filter right down into juniors. So the next generation of halves will come through under this new rule set. All these guys debuting now came through the generation of structure where that would have filtered right down because that's what was happening.
Actually play footy, what's in front.
So the rule changes will make an effect on that, but we've just got to be patient and wait for those guys to come through because they're probably, 16s now, would you say?
Yeah, so like our Harold Matts. So we've got a good young halfback in there, Mitchell Woods. He's
He
that talented.
He can play.
Yeah, so
I'll
he's
find
that
out if he's
talented.
related to me. He must. If he's talented, he must be related to me.
There's so many Woods out there.
I went and had a look at him at the grand final at the Leichhardt.
So he
can play.
He's special, but he's that good that the Swans want him, and he looks like going number 1 in their draft.
You're joking.
So that's how good this kid is, But he loves the Bulldogs and he loves Belmore.
That's the other thing we haven't really factored in, but we'll save that conversation for another day. A conversation for another day because we've touched on it. But a good athlete these days is certainly headhunted by a whole range of sports at a really young age. They almost see body types and just go, right, there you go. It's really weird compared to back in the 60s and 70s, Phil, isn't it? It's just which we lived through.
Especially sports like swimming, where they don't have the money to throw at athletes.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Like if the Bulldogs came to me now as a 16-year-old and said NRL or swimming because you get a certain body type, it's very hard to choose swimming this day and age.
Yep, good point. Anyway, we hope good players will keep choosing the Bulldogs. That's the key to the future. Luke Goodwin, thank you so much, mate.
Thanks,
we'll do it again next week.
My pleasure.
We've still got Phil Young and James Magnussen with us, and after the break, we'll be joined by Reni Maitua as we continue Bulldogs Unleashed. We'll look at more at what James has been up to and his life as a supporter of the Bulldogs, talk about the old days with Phil. He's got some great yarns to tell, and of course, Reni will contribute to all that as well.
My name's Braden Burns and I play for the Canterbury-Bankstown Bulldogs. I love playing footy because obviously I've played it since I was a kid. Yeah, the fans are obviously really important to every footy player. We go out and we play for the fans and the members especially. You hear the fans obviously when they're giving it to you on the sideline. As a young kid I was pretty easily influenced and I sort of got into gambling a little bit, not too bad, but I guess it just takes away from the game. You don't sort of sit there and watch the game for what it is and enjoy those special moments and sort of support your team. You're more worried about your multis. Yeah, I'm really proud that the Bulldogs as a partner would reclaim the game. I'm someone who's sort of gotten off betting. I'm really proud to say that that's something that I'm sort of walked away from, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Don't let a bet take you away from the match. Reclaim the game. Be gamble aware.
This week's headlines.
Welcome back to Bulldogs Unleashed, brought to you by Reclaim the Game, and we're reclaiming Reni Maitua for his second appearance on the program. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks for having me, mate. Good to be back.
It is good to have you with us, with Phil Young and James Magnussen. And James, we're going to talk about your fandom and what you've been up to lately, but I guess to connect this to Reni, Reni would have been right up there with your heroes when you were sort of in the, I guess, that prime of your life following footy, wouldn't he?
I thought you were about to say Reni's a big fan of mine, but
Oh, well, I'm sure he is too. That was the next topic.
Yeah. That was my era, right? It was like my fondest memories, probably 02 through to 2010, like that period, Dogs of War period. Reni, Willie, Sonny, they were all my idols at the time. So grew up playing footy myself, trying to play like those guys. Shoulder charges didn't work out as well for me as it did for those guys. Slightly bigger shoulders on those three, but that was what I grew up on, and my fondest memories are of those years.
Well, we'll get back to that in just a tick, but I wanted to ask you firstly, James. You've been, obviously, it's always hard, and I'm sure Reni and Phil, even Phil in the semi-professional era, could identify with it not being easy when you finish your footy career. In your terms, finishing as a professional athlete, how have you sort of settled in now? You're working in the media predominantly. We'll talk about Dancing with the Stars in just a minute, but that's not a full-time job.
Yeah, I don't know, and Reni can probably attest to this as well as Phil. Like, I don't know if you ever really settle into it, because as an athlete, you have this really special thing, like this burning desire to be successful, to compete, to win, and that you can't just flick an off switch on that. Like, that doesn't happen. There's nothing else in life where you can run out in front of, in my case, 20,000 fans. In these guys' cases, 80,000 fans. You can't emulate that again. So do you ever settle into normal life? Like, not really. Not really, Bill. But you find other things to keep you occupied and motivate you, and try and find little wins along the way that can somewhat emulate that feeling that you had as an athlete. But I think as athletes, we never stop internally feeling like athletes. Yeah.
How did you find it, Phil? Given that you had a job and you had other interests then and time to pursue them.
We had a job, but we worked during the week and we played football and trained late at night. But surfing was always my first love anyway.
Right.
So I just went back to my mates I surf with, and back into surfing, and I think released my energy that way.
Yeah.
Yes, but surfing was always number one with me.
And Reni, we've talked a lot about how difficult it's been for a lot of players, and you didn't find it that easy either. So how has it been lately?
It's been good for me now, but obviously the transition is quite tough. I'll have to say surfing is something that I love as well, and wish I was a professional surfer before a professional rugby league player. I would have loved to have travelled the world and surfed the best waves, but look, you never lose that burning desire as an athlete to compete. I've just come from Marrickville PCYC and I couldn't help myself. I just played a full game of Oztag against the kids. So I'm going to be quite sore tonight. And I like to stay active, doing some boxing with Sonny, or even in the water, like John Sutton and I in the surf. It kills me that he surfs better than me, but he's got more time because he's just running a blue shirt for South, and I'm out there doing it. I'm looking after, multi-million-dollar Maryvale contracts with my cleaning company, or not the company I own, but the one I work for. So I don't get to serve as much as I can now, but I'm definitely still competitive.
How did your Bulldogs support begin, James? Was it something like a lot of us, you sort of inherited it? But
yeah, so my old man's from Birrong. Mm-hmm. He and his family are all Birrong locals, so smack bang in the middle of Bulldogs territory. He moved up to Port Macquarie where he met my mum and had me. They said my first words were Mum, Dad, then Terry Lamb in that order. So I was raised on it.
And how does it marry up? I mean, in my experience as a journalist and broadcaster, I've always found it fascinating how athletes relate to each other. And there are a lot of athletes who are 100% devoted to their particular sport, but they are very much interested in other sports and talking to other athletes. And I know you've been on other shows with me, and you're one of those people, James. How did your rugby league support and your interest in that game influence your swimming career, or did it?
Probably vice versa in that. So, when you're growing up supporting a club, you can always be like super critical of players and coaches and things like that. And then when you become a professional athlete yourself, you get a much better understanding of what goes into it, and what the players are going through, and how to handle that criticism and stuff like that. So it makes you a little bit less of a fanboy of the current players, I guess.
Yeah.
Because you kind of understand and can communicate with them on a similar level and know what they're going through. Like Reni and Phil wanted to be surfers, when I was young, I would have loved to have been a rugby league player. Reni will like this one. My first email address was thenextsunnybill@hotmail.com. So that's where I thought I was headed. Yeah. I remember saying to Mum, I want to get Magnussen across my shoulders like Sonny had Williams. And she said, you want to do a bit more shoulder work if you want to fit Magnussen across there. But they were growing up, like people always say to me, who was your biggest idol for swimming and stuff like that? None of them, I didn't really connect with any swimmers growing up. So there was like Thorpe, Hackey, guys like that. I was like, find it hard to relate with those guys. My idols were, like Sonny, Reni, Willie, Braith, Hasm, Rocket Rod. They were my idols growing up, my sporting idols and people that I wanted to emulate, which is kind of a weird one when you go down the path of swimming, which is so different in that, I always played rugby league and I loved the physicality of it and the contact. It's just a fun part of it. Yeah. And then you go to swimming where there's none of that. The hardest thing I hit is the water when I come off the blocks. So it's very different sports, but I've probably always felt more plugged into the rugby league world than the swimming world, to be honest, even when I was doing my thing at an international level.
We'll talk a little later about what it's like before you come out for an event at Olympic Games or World Championships, comparing to the dressing room before a rugby league game. Phil, did you have an idol that wasn't a rugby league player? Were you sort of a bit like that?
Nat Young, midget Farrell.
Yeah. Were you a midget fan or a Nat fan? Because usually two camps there. I was kind of in the midget camp, but I don't know.
I was a midget fan first off, and then kind of
gravitated to Nat.
Gravitated to Nat because a bit more radical and that.
Right.
Midget was so you had a combination of both.
Yeah.
Being radical and smooth.
I don't know if anyone young who's listening to us has a clue, but Midget Farrell and Nat Young were massive surfing names back in the day. That might have even been before your time, mate.
Before my time, but mine was Hockey, another goofy footer, Tom
great
Carroll,
guy.
Sonny
He's
Garcia.
a good man, Hockey.
Yeah, I've met Hockey a couple of times. And I just followed other goofy footers, Tom Carroll, Sonny Garcia, obviously Slater, and then going through the generations now, I got to meet, Mick Fanning and, Dean Morrison and Joel Parkinson, and I've just always loved surfing, and I'm always in the surfing fantasy that I'm actually losing quite convincingly at the moment. So there's a bit of money on the line there, but yeah.
Are you okay with how the World Tour has evolved in terms of it's restructured a little bit now?
Yeah, I don't like the final series, how the way they cut it off. Sort of, I think they've cut it off now, and then like the way Steph Gilmore won the World Championship last year. Even though I'm a proud Australian, I'm happy that she won it, but to come from where she was, I think in 4th or 5th, to then beat Carissa Moore, it just found it a little bit unusual. Or surfing that one event on the one day to find out who the world champion is. So I think they should just keep it as how it was and have the master, and finish off a pipe. And that's
it's a bit like going to the bunker, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a strange format, and I don't think everyone's too happy with it. But
we'll deal with surfing now because I want to get into what it was like for you as a kid, Phil. Growing up and in the Canterbury-Bankstown area and actually being a surfer.
Yeah, I went to Banky High and I was the only kid that surfed at Banky High. I lived at Riverwood and to get to Cronulla we used to get on our skateboards and skateboard to Mortdale station and catch a train from there, get off. Then we'd go to a storeboard shop where they used to store our boards and we'd pay them like 20 cents a week to store our board there. Then get out and then walk all the way around to Wanda. And then it was from there. And then I moved out to Cronulla when I was 17 with my mates. So I was living in Cronulla and surfing at 17, and then I come into grade.
And I guess particularly in the semi-professional era, I mean, surfing's a terrific sport for conditioning your body, isn't it? Like upper body as well as lower body.
It's great for your mind too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To get out there early in the morning and watch that sun come up and take a few waves and that, and then paddle back out and have a look at that sun just coming up over the horizon. It's a good feeling.
It's an old cliche. It's only a surfer knows the feeling, and it's true. I mean, it's just you and the elements, and it's you and whatever comes at you. And I've surfed in the Ments and parts of it, in Indo and big swells, and you can really find out what sort of ticker you have and what sort of fear, what you're willing to take on. I think I'm one of the only Polynesians that can swim quite well. So
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, so back in the day, Steve Folks love swimming. So we do 2, 3, 4K fitness sessions. Yeah. Probably doesn't seem too much to you, but Sonny Bill and I were the only two. They had 3 groups. You had the Marlins, I think you had the Dugongs, and I don't know, there was somewhere in the middle, but Sonny Bill and I were the only 2 Polynesians that could swim and swim quite well. And it was actually quite funny because all the rest of the Polynesian boys would be in the Dugongs, and they'd be like at the end of the pool holding on to the ropes or holding on to the sides of the pool. And I'm a professional lifeguard as well, so swimming was a great, and surfing for that matter. I didn't get to surf as much during the winter because of footy and being too sore, but for my fitness personally, surfing and swimming was vital.
How much surfing did you get to do?
Well, so in Port Macquarie, we actually had, when I was a young kid, Damien King won the world title for bodyboarding. So everyone in town started bodyboarding. Like we would all bodyboard, and like every now and then you'd see Kingy out in the surf and people would go nuts. So the whole town went bodyboarding mad. Now I'm in Bondi. I just got myself a longboard and have started back up. Only problem is, Reni said when you're out there in the surf, it's just you and the elements. At Bondi, it's you, the elements, 50 other hacks.
Maruba's the same now.
But no.
Should have been around in my day with no leg ropes.
Yeah. But no, I love it. It's funny. I went for a surf in summer, and my wetty was rough. The wetty was no good for me, and I also had a bit of trouble with the sizing for the wetties and stuff. And so I decided to go out for a surf in my budgie smugglers, just in my Speedos on a longboard there at North Bondi, which is like the busiest spot. And so many people were sort of looking across. No one said anything, but geez, I was getting some looks at North Bondi in my Speedos.
And I suppose body surfers are just a speed bump, really, aren't they?
Well, you run them straight over.
Yeah, I know. I can tell. I can tell you that from first-hand experience.
I get into this. I mean, Phil can attest. I mean, like localism's real. Like if you've spent your whole life at a beach, you've put 20, 30 years onto one wave. You're expected to respect that local, and they get priority over the wave. But now, surfing has grown so much around the world that everyone can just pick up a board now, paddle out, whether it be a huge fiberglass board. It's quite dangerous. And it's not as aggressive anymore. I mean, it used to be very territorial where I grew up. Everywhere.
Back in the 70s, we were too frightened to go and surf at Maruba. Yeah, the Maruba boy. Have you ever seen the Maruba walk? On the Maruba boy walk?
Oh, hang on.
There it is.
What's happening, mate? What's going on? What's happening, the Maruba boy walk.
That's a slice of history.
There's cameras facing the ocean now, so that's why we've got to be careful.
There is a slice of how do you think it's healthy for athletes to actually have another sport that they can do? I mean, a lot of them aren't allowed to do other sports, depending on what it is. But it must be, as you guys suggested, it must be therapeutic, if not.
Absolutely, more than that, it's they're good at one sport, but they mightn't be good at the other sport. So it creates another challenge for them too, in their mind on that. I think you've got to have more than one sport, otherwise you become a boring person.
Golf's getting massive now.
Yeah.
A lot of these young players, like they're all starting up channels and stuff and YouTube accounts with golfing content. So that's definitely been the biggest, I reckon, trend with the younger players now.
Okay, because it's a bit more safer, I suppose.
We played plenty of golf, but we were usually on the drink when we were playing golf. By the end of 18 holes, I've seen, I won't mention some players, but I've seen some carts go into the water and some carts roll down some hills. So
Shout out Willie Mason.
I have played golf. I have played golf with rugby league players over the years, and there were a few carts going into bunkers that we couldn't get out, and a couple went into trees and things like that. Again, no names, no pack drill. I will tell you the names of the people on this table, though. Reni Maitua, James Magnussen and Phil Young. They're our special guests, and we'll be back with more Bulldogs Unleashed, so hope you can stick around.
Let's go in the sheds.
This is Bulldogs Unleashed, brought to you by Reclaim the Game. Phil Young, James Magnussen, Reni Maitua, talking about a whole range of things. And what we will talk about now is, Phil, what you do in retirement, so to speak. That is from playing rugby league, of course. It's been a fair few years retired now. But in more recent times, you've headed the Ambassadors Club for the Bulldogs. Can you explain what that is and what role it plays?
Well, basically, the Ambassadors started off in 1997 when Bobby Hagan and Chris Anderson went to the States to have a look at their training facilities and what they were doing as athletes. And they come across the Ambassadors over there, which looked after players that fell on hard times, which we've been doing now since 1997, looking after players that fell on hard times, especially back in those days where it was more money. Today it's mental well-being now with players, looking at make sure players looked after that do get themselves in that situation. We look after some grants and that for young kids coming through and help them out. Some financially because young kids, they can't afford the gear and that. So, it's just looking after ex-players from the Bulldogs, whether it's a money situation or a mental being situation.
It's a great idea. I know you've had some involvement in it too, Reni. I mean, there have been plenty of days where they've raised money by having a celebration of certain grand final winning teams and things like that. You've been to a lot of those functions.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic just to get involved with the fans again. And a lot of fans, I don't expect to go to a game and people recognise who I am. A lot of kids these days wouldn't have a clue who I am. But when you go to a game and you get those older fans come up to you and talk about those good times and, obviously the times when we're winning, it makes you feel, good about yourself and happy to be there and happy to have worn the Bulldog jersey. So ambassador work is very important. I think it's great what Phil's doing. I think it's vital for especially, players that have fallen onto hard times and you want to get ex-players back involved with their club. So give them that sense of belonging that, they did represent this club and wear the jersey. And I think it's a great idea.
How important is heritage to you? I mean, not just from a fan's perspective, but as a professional athlete. And you mentioned earlier the role of some of the great swimmers that we've had over the years. I mean, do they utilise that much in the tradition and culture of the swimming team?
Not really, Bill. Not as much as they should. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a sport where you can lose touch with it pretty quickly once you retire because there's not a lot done in that space. But I think we're always a few years behind the professional sports like NRL, AFL, and some of the other codes where there's more money, more time, more staff, more, I guess, just more people to kind of look out for those ex-swimmers or ex-athletes. So it's something they haven't done super well in the sport to this point. But in terms of the heritage, one of the things you first think when you pull on that yellow cap, which would be the same as when you pull on that Bulldogs jersey, is the people that have come before you, whether it be in your event or just that team in general. So heritage is super important. It's important to be passed on from generation to generation to know that it's more than just the jersey you're representing. It's it's the heritage of the club. It's something the Bulldogs have always done very well, Phil. And a lot of it too, you talk about financial help and just helping people organise their lives if they've fallen on hard times. And a lot of it's just about maintaining that very important mateship. And I mean a positive mateship, not the negative mateship we sometimes see make the headlines, and that's not a good thing. But we're talking about real supportive, positive mateship.
Well, lots of times it's not even money. It's about seeing a person, going to see a person, having a talk with them. Like you go around to like home care places and that, and see some of the ex-players and that. Have a talk to them. Just make sure that they're going okay, you know. And then you'll give a call to one of their mates to say, "Look, Bill's here. Go and see him." So the teammates go and see him. That comradeship that James was talking about, you know, it's just making sure that person feels important.
I think you can feel very isolated once you retire, you know, and you miss that team environment and the dressing room and being around the boys all the time, and it can become very lonely very quickly because you're trying to fit into a society that you've not had any involvement in. It's just you finish a career where you get told what to do, what to eat, what time to train, and then you go into the real world and you're in this work life and you don't have any sort of social or life skills, that you can feel isolated very quickly. And I think making a player feel that sense of belonging again is something that he's probably lacking across all codes, and probably in swimming or whatever it might be. So the ambassador work that the Dogs are doing, and I know they've been doing it well for a long time. I think it's fantastic what Phil's doing for sure.
May I add with that, all the ambassadors are volunteers. They volunteer in that. But mostly, mate, is 99% of the players are shy.
Yeah.
And they won't, unless generally you get it third hand that you go and see somebody. No one will ring you up and say, I'm having a bad time. You know, so
and that's where the network becomes important, doesn't it? So you are plugged into what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know.
And James, I wanted to talk about the team thing and the camaraderie. I find that fascinating with swimming, always have, because we very much function as a national team. Everyone loves the Australian swimming team, one of our iconic national teams. And yet, when you compete, it's by and large an individual event. And you're often competing with your own teammates to be in the relay team, for example, or to be the top two qualifiers, all those things. Yeah. And then you've got the miniature teams in relays, which is an incredible. I mean, relay swimming, of course, is just one of the highlights of any carnival, whether it's your school carnival or the Olympic Games, as you've been in, James. So how did you find that? Is it hard to cultivate a team ethic in swimming? Do we do it well? Is it important?
Yeah, it's pretty different to most sports because you don't always have a common goal. So, for example, if I throw back right to the start of my career, so I'm on the swim team with Eamon Sullivan, who's one of the more experienced guys on the team. My goal, win the 100 freestyle. His goal, win the 100 freestyle. We're teammates. And, everybody's different, but I don't like to like my competitors. I don't want to get in the blocks and go, oh, he's a really good bloke. Yeah. We're just here, for racing. No, I want to dislike my competitors. That's what gave me a bit of an edge. It was like, I want to beat this guy. He's trying to take my livelihood type thing. Not that they are, but that's just the mentality that I wanted. So it's a pretty weird environment in that, the closer you get to a big event, the less you talk to some of your teammates because you're about to go head to head with them. And then it might be like a day or two before you race individually, you have a relay together. So go figure. It's just it's a really weird environment. And then when you look at the wider team, we make our main income through sponsors and endorsements and that sort of stuff, which has always been a big part of swimming. But all those sponsors and companies are probably looking at one or two swimmers. Yeah. And there's only X amount of companies that have the money to spend up big on athletes. So even within the team generally, you are competing against everyone.
Of course, for sponsorship dollars.
Yeah, so it's pretty weird. And then the other thing, you go away on a footy trip, and within reason, and anything goes. There's nothing that can really be said that is too offensive, or there's nothing that can really be done that rattles anyone. Like, everyone's operating on a similar wavelength. You go away an Australian swimming team, and you'll have everything from a 35-year-old man with 4 kids and a wife, to a 15-year-old girl who's still at school, who's like a freak up-and-coming talent, to like maybe a core group of like 10 guys between 18 and 25 who want to party after racing and chasing girls around on tour. So it's like such a weird environment. And like, you sit in a food hall together and you're constantly being careful about what you say or what you do because there's 15-year-old girls on the team,
Yes.
as well as the 35-year-old guy with kids who'll get pissed off if you're talking rubbish. So the grousest times I had was when, we had a squad at Sydney Olympic Park, and at one point I think there was like 7 or 8 of us, all guys, all between the age of 18 and 25. We all had the same mentality. And that was when, and then we all did have similar goals because it was less about swimming and more about pulling. But that was the best times for me. But as an Australian swim team, it's a very delicate balance. And that's why you always see, rumours of unrest and stuff around the Australian swim team. It's impossible to avoid.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because even in footy, you'll have fierce competitors within a squad for a position, but your overall goal is still the team win, isn't it? It's not the individual win. So you've got that overriding thing that governs your behaviour, isn't it? Unlike what James was just saying, which is a race win between individuals. So,
Well, in a team environment, I've got 12 other blokes on the field that can cover me if I stuff up. In an individual sport, that's you purely, you have to swim the perfect race to get the result that you want. Whereas I can play at 80% game and the rest of my teammates cover me that extra 20% just to get the win. So you got to respect that individual sport. Like I've had one boxing fight and it was just me in that ring. It's the scariest thing I've ever done. It wasn't the fear of the opponent. It was like, it's just me in there.
Yeah.
Like, there's no one here to support me at all.
Yeah. It's
So-
the best and the worst thing.
Exactly.
It's the best because all the accolades are zeroed in on you. But all the pressure and expectation is zeroed in on you. Yeah. I remember, I think about the time I decided I was all in on swimming, I was 16 and I played in a rugby league grand final for the Port Macquarie Sharks. We went the full season undefeated, got to the grand final, and the full-time siren went and we were leading by 4 points. There was a scrum, and our lock had come across from rugby, I think. He didn't completely know the rules. He picks the ball out of the scrum and kicks it in the air in celebration, just kicks it straight up and starts celebrating. Other team catches it, spins it out to the wing, scores in the corner, and converts from the sideline to beat us. Whole season undefeated, 80 minutes undefeated, then we lose in overtime. And I remember saying to my dad after it, like I played one of my best games of the season then. Like I was really happy with how I'd played in that grand final, and I lost. I was like, what a hollow feeling. Like I had no control over this idiot, like not an idiot, like over this guy kicking the ball up and celebrating. Like I hate that feeling of not being in control. And that's when I was like, when I swim, it's all me. I don't have to. And it was different to how like a team athlete would look at it, where I was like, I don't have to rely on anyone else. And I like that and I want that. And that's probably the slight differences in mindset. Like I couldn't handle not being in full control of a situation, which, when you get to a world champs and there's 20,000 people cheering, you walk out in that pool deck and you've got the weight of a nation on your shoulders, then you're like, ooh, is that the right decision? No, but it's part of it, right? And you're like, it doesn't matter what my other teammates are doing. Like, this is me. This is my preparation. This is my race. And that's what I liked about swimming, that I found frustrating about rugby league.
When I'm curious, Phil, when it was semi-professional, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that it was any less intense and all those things, but was it easier because there weren't livelihoods at stake, because you were playing for the purity of the game, was it easier to be a team player? Or did that not? Was there still that ambition and competitiveness?
I don't think that come into it.
Right.
You played the game because you wanted to play.
Yeah.
And you was playing with mates. And you'd get up Monday morning and went to work, because if you had a sore leg or that, the bloke at work didn't give a damn. You know what I mean? Because you're here today to turn up for work.
Yeah.
Football was yesterday.
Yeah.
So that's how it was. But
how would you have reacted if your lock kicked the ball in celebration? Would you have roasted them?
Can't say that on the radio.
Did anyone get you to sign their footy card at work? Because I had a footy card with Phil Young on it. Yeah. I remember the Phil Young footy cards. I don't know where they all went in my collection, but
I was an apprentice butcher then when I first came into grade and that. So I quickly got promoted to the counter, serving at the counter, because a lot of people used to come in the shop. Marketing.
It did have its fringe benefits then, even though you weren't getting paid millions of dollars. to play the game. I want to talk quickly before we wrap up this segment. We're going to get into the history in our final segment, but motivation. So we're kind of following on really in a way from what James is talking about. What motivated you before a game, Reni? What did you do to pump yourself up? I've heard some really interesting stories over the years from all kinds of sports.
Like, there's the old cliches, there's the music and getting in that mindset of, I'm going to be aggressive. But for me, I think my motivation came from my fear of letting my teammates down. When I had to look across the dressing room at Marco Mealy putting Denker into his face, Willie Mason, Sonny Bill, Haslam, Steve Price, my motivation was to not let any of my teammates down, and that was what drove me and scared me and made me want to win. And I came in as a South junior that wasn't expected to even play first grade, into a side that was building from 2002 to winning a premiership and getting it in my first year. So I always had that mindset, do not let my teammate down, and that was my motivation.
I think that's about as pure as it gets, really, isn't it, with team sport? What more could you want? And as a coach, I'd imagine that would be the mindset you would want.
Well, that's the way you're coached. You're coached to not let your teammate down, And every one of us made a mistake on a football field, but your teammate covered for you, which sees the burden.
There was one period in the grand final. It's one thing that I remember so clearly about the grand final is missing a tackle on Chris Flannery and Braithen Astor giving me a spray. A person who I've been friends with since I was 4 years old. And that gave me that sense of fear because I just let my teammate down by letting Chris Flannery get on my inside shoulder. And that's something that sticks in my... Besides the 9 days of drinking after winning it, that's something that sticks in my mind from that game. It's a pure thought that I can remember clearly just from that grand final. So,
wow. What was it like in your dressing rooms before the game? What was going on there?
We didn't have headphones and music like
that. No, no portable music?
No.
Did someone put a turntable on with a...
I would just sit there and just go through what we'd done at training during the week and that, and then walk around, talk to a few players, and then knock, away we go.
Were you, obviously being in the halves, you were one of the talkers? Were you one of the, just worked around with the guys and had a few words?
Yeah, walk around. Well, especially back in those days when your halfback kind of covered, cover defence, where I was talking all the time.
Yeah.
And you didn't have, not like today where you can watch videos of teams moves and that. You had to pick them up in your head and listen to. If they called a move, you put that number in your head. So next time it's on, they're coming down the blind side or coming here.
Right.
Like Arthur Beetson would have, say, John Peard come off his shoulder, or Arthur would go out and then come back in and hit Fairfax coming up the middle. If I seen Fairfax getting ready for it, I'd say he's coming up the middle. Things like that,
Yep.
You'd see like the Roosters would push you one side and make a short side. Ron Coote would come down the blind. You say Coote's coming down the blind, or Manly, you'd have Phil Lowe would come, big pommy bloke would come from inside outside. You say Lowe's coming off Fulton's shoulder. So, we had to double up on the defence on that. So
that was all in your head?
You had to have it in your head. You had to learn that what their moves were, because that was the only way you learned was on the field and looking and listening.
What was your motivation before a swimming final? Olympic Games, World Championships, what'd you do?
Slightly different in that I was like trying to bring it down a bit.
Right.
You can get too amped up. Like kind of chalk and cheese with rugby league, and like my event only went for under a minute, and any one little mistake you're done at that level. So if you miss one stroke, one kick, one breath, tiny bit on the start, like anything goes wrong in that entire race, then you may as well just stop and get out of the pool. So it's all about like bringing it down a bit, like calming yourself down, because when you walk out in front of that crowd and it's roaring that you're going to get up emotionally. And I think for most athletes, it's not that hard to get up emotionally. It's who we are, that desire to win. It's sort of about keeping a level head and executing your game plan or your race plan or whatever that is. So I'd be focusing in on process. What are the cues that I need to hit throughout this race to do it my best. And just trying to keep a lid on it a bit. Like I wasn't listening to music to G me up or anything because I was already frothing at the bit. So I needed to like rein it in.
Which makes me wonder, what do the Americans do?
They're a bit louder.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty in that. You know how they do the celebrity boxing matches and stuff. There's plenty in that American team. I wouldn't mind jumping in the ring with. I reckon they're pretty loud and obnoxious.
Oh, now you've declared it. I'm sure some entrepreneur out there will try and arrange it for you in the next 12 months. James Magnussen, Phil Young, Reni Maitua. We'll be back to talk about some dog days, our memories as reporters, fans and players.
Let's talk about the dog days.
You're watching Bulldogs Unleashed, brought to you by Reclaim the Game with James Magnussen, Reni Maitua, and now we're going to dive a little deeper into the Phil Young story. Phil started for the Bulldogs in 1972, at least in first grade, wasn't it?
Yeah, 72 in first grade, yeah.
And what was the club like then? I mean, we're building, of course, to those grand final appearances in 74 and 79, and then the win in 1980. But you mentioned earlier in the show the club was in a pretty good place then in terms of building.
Yeah, it was building because we had a great bunch of juniors coming through at that time. In 72, we had about probably 4 or 5, 6 internationals in the side. In 73, we had none. They were all removed because of age, I suppose. And then it was all juniors from then. I think our average age was 21, 22 in 73. And then we played, we got to the finals in 73 and then just for juniors, yeah.
Well, in 72, the Berries finished 6th. Manly, East and St George and South were the top 4. Manly beat East in the grand final 1914. That was their first title after 5 grand final losses, Manly. Terry Randall, Chad's dad, was in that side.
What a great player.
And that era, you mentioned a few names earlier, just remarkable. 73, Canterbury made the top 5, lost to Newtown in the qualifying final, and Manly beat Cronulla in the grand final. 74, finished 3rd on the ladder, lost the grand final of the Roosters 19-4. You started 15 games, I think. Gary Hughes played 7 games. Don Mosley played halfback, and Mark Hughes was 5'8" in the grand final. What was your story that season? Do you remember?
My story that season, it was a good season. We made the grand final. Sad part about it, I didn't play in the grand final.
Yeah. I didn't want to bring that up too strongly, but how was it for you?
James is
Well, I did refer to it earlier. You played...
I think it was 16 games that year, I think.
Yeah, but you played with some great halfbacks and halves. What was the thinking then in terms of, was there a rotation system or was it just, who the coach?
When I first came into grade, they had, I was fairly young obviously, but when I first came into grade, they had 2 New South Wales halfbacks, which was Terry Reynolds and Les Hutchings.
Yep.
And basically in 71, I got called up to play 3rd grade. And they said, I went out to Shark Park there to play, and they said, you can't play today. I said, why? He said, because Terry Reynolds won't get his hair cut. And Kevin Ryan sacked Terry Reynolds because he wouldn't get his hair cut. And I had long hair, and they said, you can't play because you got long hair too. And that was it.
Can you believe it? I was a teenager in those days, so I totally understand what was going on. How much longer was it than it is now, just for anyone who's wanting to know?
Oh, a lot longer, yeah.
Russell Fairfax length or a bit longer? Yeah. I always remember your hair being about that long when you were playing.
But, a little bit longer, but then I got called up in the 3rd grade grand final, and in the final because they got beaten in the semis and they dropped Terry Reynolds then, and then called me up in the final, played the final grand final, we won that. And then I went to Queensland surfing because it was kind of a mini cyclone up there, so we went to Noosa.
This bloke can identify with that.
So me and my mate chucked everything in the car, and we went to Noosa, and we surfed Noosa. We used to sleep on the beach there with tea gardens, tea trees there, and have a little fire going, and then just surfed. And then I rang my dad, and my dad said, "Well, you got to come back because you've been selected in the 1st grade squad." And I said, "Oh, I really don't want to come back, Dad," because the surf was that good. So I delayed it 2 weeks, and I came back. And then so I went from a 3rd grade grand final to 1st grade, and played against the great Billy Smith that day.
It sounds like you don't want to talk about 74, but really, what did happen that year when Don got picked for the grand final? Had you been injured? What was the story, or was it a strategic move? Do you remember?
No, it's just Shifty. Shifty thought that
Malcolm Cliff, the coach,
Donny was a better bloke for the position for the grand final.
Right.
Simple as that.
Yeah, and I guess that was a kind of a chess move too, because you played a very good side. I mean, that 1974 Roosters side was pretty amazing. It was a legendary grand final winning team full of amazing players.
Well, you had someone like Arthur there. Arthur Beetson was I'd probably rate Arthur the second best player I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
You know? Arthur was a big man, but with good footwork, quick feet, good hands. You know, he was a typical halfback, but triple the size. But he had speed, Arthur.
Yeah.
You know, and he had a very, very good, how would I say it, sense touch. He could throw a ball not even looking, and there was someone there, you know, just hitting a hole. He was an incredible player, Arthur Beetson.
I mean, you did beat that side prior to, of course, losing in the grand final. I mean,
I played in that side to beat the side.
Yeah, so it makes you wonder what Shifty was thinking when he made the choice. But anyway, he's still around, so we won't upset him. We might even try and get him on the show if he'll come on. Malcolm Clift, he's a legend for the Bulldogs as a coach. But Peter Winchester actually played in the centres in that game too. Of course, Pete's
Peter
part
Winchester
of the ambassadors.
was probably one of the most underrated players I've ever seen in my life. You know, in the final, we played Manly in the final, and the two centres was Brannigan and Fulton. And Peter Winchester turned them inside out. You know.
And how difficult was it to play? Particularly Manly and the Roosters in those days were absolutely star-studded teams. I mean, we talk in the modern terms about some of the Broncos, Canberra sides, Melbourne Storm, but that was the equivalent of say the greatest Melbourne Storm side. I think you look at the Roosters and the Manly in those days. That's a fair comment, isn't it, Phil?
We were fortunate against Manly. Well, not fortunate, but we had the wood over Manly. We actually drew with Manly with 11 men. And Manly had an international side like the Graham Eady, Fulton, Brannigan, Ken Irvine, Malcolm Reilly.
Malcolm Reilly, one of the toughest players,
Malcolm
English
Reilly,
player.
John O'Neill.
And Terry Randall's still going around.
Terry Randall.
Again, one of the toughest guys ever to play.
Ian Martin, probably one of the toughest blokes
Yeah,
ever put
great player.
football boots on.
Yeah.
They had a fantastic side. We're just a bunch of kids.
How did you beat them?
Just a bunch of kids, like Reni was saying, just playing together, playing for each other.
So what do you say to Cameron Ciraldo and the bunch of kids playing in 2023?
Look at each other, and play for each other.
Interesting, isn't it?
You know what I mean? When you come off that field, have respect for the bloke you're walking off with.
Yeah. Now, we talked about some of the great teams you played against. As I said, you had Don Mosley, you had Timmy Pickup, great player as well, and a young fellow who came through towards the end of your career. What did you see in Steve Mortimer?
Steve, when he first came, he was kind of all over the place, and but he got his game together. I think Steve probably changed the halfback of becoming more of a runner and that in rugby league, especially from the scrum base, which you don't see today. I used to always love taking the opportunity to run from the scrum, but they don't do that today. I don't know why, especially when you've got a front rower that's the opposition halfback now. Have a crack at him. Have a go. You know?
That is interesting, the way they line up for scrums these days, isn't it? And who's in them and who's not.
But Steve had great instinct about himself, and that, and he was a tremendous little player, Stephen.
And his cover defence was outstanding as well. I mean, we talk about some of the great tackles.
He used to watch me.
I was going to say, how would you describe yourself as a player, Phil? Because a lot of people wouldn't have even seen footage of you and probably would find it hard to get now.
Compared to a current player.
Oh, that's a hard question.
Who would you say? What about in this Bulldogs lineup?
How would I describe myself as a player? I describe myself as a player. I played first grade, and I think anyone that played first grade had to play.
Was one of the, like Shifty talks about his kicking game, for example, and how he liked to have a varied kicking game. He was on the show doing that the other day.
Terry Shifty or Terry Lamb?
Well, Shifty said.
Shifty.
Yeah. But what about you? Did you prefer kicking? You said you liked to run?
No, because the game back then didn't allow for kickers or rules and that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
If you put it over the try line back then, the side picked it up and it was a 25 tap for them.
Yeah.
So you're better off putting it short and tackling them short of the try line.
How was Turvey's chip kick greeted back in the day? I sort of vaguely remember it was kind of radical at the time and considered high risk. I don't know. Is my memory serving me correctly, or what did you think of it?
That was Turv. That's why I expect Turv was special.
Yeah.
Very few people could do it. Or Lord Ted could do it. Les Johns, But that was Turvey. Turvey was something special out of the box.
1976, you lost to Manly in the preliminary 15-12. Bobby McCarthy was in that side. That was a great time for Canterbury to get Bobby McCarthy in.
I love playing with Macca. Macca was again, what Reni was saying, Macca, even though we were a bunch of kids, but Macca brought so much experience and so much, so much experience on the field and that, and whatever Macca said, we did.
That's an interesting point, and it gets back to what we were talking about right at the start of the show when Luke Goodwin was here about, especially when you got a developing side, a young side, and the Bulldogs have the youngest in the comp at the moment, the importance of having at least one tactical leader who's experienced. In your experience, how important was that to you, Reni? I mean, I know we had a very balanced side in the early 2000s, but...
I was just talking about it today. It's funny that you just brought it up, and I think I was fortunate enough to come into an era where I had Steve Reardon, Steve Price, Barry Ward, these guys that were well-respected, old, hard nuts of the game, and things were just different back then. You didn't have a voice until you played 100 games, whereas the back end of my career, I felt like the pendulum kind of swung, and it was the younger guys that became a bit louder, and I think the dynamic of a strong team is having that strong leadership group that have control over the younger player. Melbourne, for example, I mean, Cameron Smith, Cooper Cronk, Billy Slater, they didn't just become good leaders on their own. They had Matty Orford and Matty Geyer, and I think Lazo would have been there coming through there. They would have been coming through a system there where they've learnt from other good leaders, become good men themselves, and then you just fall into line naturally. I wouldn't say a word around the dressing room. I wasn't allowed in parts of the dressing room. It was just that level of respect that you had for the older player until you'd played 100 games, and then you were allowed to say something. I don't know if it's like that anymore, but that's the way it should be. You've got to respect everyone that's come before you. And what we did in the early thousands came from the guys in the 70s, 80s, 90s. We never forgot that. We were just caretakers of what came before us. And that was built into us to be a Bulldog. Even though I was a Rabbitoh Junior, the minute I walked through those doors, I knew straight away what it meant or how I had to become a Bulldog. That we were coming from those guys from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and just following off the back of what they've built.
What about culture and team leadership? They have that in a swim team, don't they? Even though we've pointed out a whole lot of reasons why it's not the same as footy, there is still that preservation of culture and responsibility and all those things. How relevant is that?
Yeah, definitely. Look, similar to Reni, like when I first came on the team as an 18-year-old, I didn't have much in the way of rights or respect, and you have to earn it through results. Probably less so in swimming about age and more about results, because it is quite a young. Most people retire by mid to late 20s, so you really can earn your stripes pretty quickly through results. But again, like that's all changed current day, because everything's about equality and not hurting people's feelings and all that stuff. So there isn't, like, whether the best example I can come up with was on the Australian swim team, you got maybe 4 to 6 masseuses, and you go away on a team, and basically how it's decided by who's on the massage table is priority based on performance. So if I come along, let's say Reni is like third best in the 100 freestyle, and I come along before my race, and I'm like, I want a massage. Reni, off you hop, I'm on. And that's just how, and that's how it works. If that happened now, like, imagine. But that was like, everybody knew the hierarchy, right? And if Ian Thorpe came in, then I hop off, and Ian Thorpe hops on. And it was just an unspoken hierarchy on the team.
Yep.
And that kind of went for everything. Like if we go to the dinner room and I come in and there's a young 18-year-old, I go first, get what I want to eat, and then he follows on, and there was like a mutual respect. But towards the end of my career, again, similar to what Reni said, that kind of flipped a bit where there was way more younger kids. They're a little bit more lippy. They're a little bit less scared because, team rules were stricter and there was less sort of imposing yourself as a senior athlete on the team. And I think we see that across all grades. Like, if you think about the example of Reece Walsh at Origin, right? There's no way early 2000s he's lipping up like that in a New South Wales team in his first Origin series.
You're talking about the referee incident? Yeah.
State of Origin, when he was lipping it at the New South
Oh, I
Wales
see.
team.
Yeah,
He
right,
was
right,
lipping
right.
up at the whole team.
Yeah, right.
He hasn't, he played great those 2 games, but he hasn't earned the right to talk to guys on the other side of the field like, Isaiah Yo's or James Tedesco's, or like, he hasn't earned that right yet. But this day and age, for whatever reason, that whole script is flipped, and it's like the young guys are the majority now, and they can say what they want with no repercussions. That's what it feels like to me.
100%. I think it's celebrated, and it for me, not just because he's a Queenslander. I'm thinking you're in your first Origin series. You're 20 years old. If you did that in my era, at club footy, we're coming after you every time.
Yeah.
Every single time. Luai, I'm a New South Welshman. Whatever he's saying, I'm going after him.
Yeah.
It was just that level of respect that you had to show, not just for older players, but just for the game in general. And it's just, it's very Americanized now, Like it's just
That's true. That's
popular to be outspoken and have an opinion. But as Australians, I don't think we're used to that kind of cockiness. And someone like Reece Walsh, who's a fantastic player, I think I'd heard a bit more that he was a Queenslander.
And I think there's clearly a line there between we want players to be entertaining, and look at what Josh Addo-Carr does when he scores a try and the way he tries to motivate the team. But that's different. It's actually done in a respectful, joyous way, not putting down somebody else or showing disrespect to somebody else. It's an important difference. How do you see all that, Phil, going back to when you played?
Oh, mate, I hate how they celebrate a try now. It's very American, and they jump on top of each other, and they just walk up and shake their hand and pat him on the shoulder and walk back to halfway, getting ready to kick off.
It gets a bit exhausting when you score 7 or 8 tries in a game, doesn't it? Which can happen.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't
know how they got the energy.
I might be old school. I don't know.
But it's a cultural change. It's just culture in general. There was a point like in sport where you had to earn your stripes, and that didn't mean making the Australian swim team or making first grade. It meant achieving something before you earned the right to have any stature in the game or in the sport or within a team. But that's and that probably goes along with like hazing and initiation and feeling a part of the group and stuff. All of that's gone. Like all of it in all
Well,
sports.
the abusive stuff probably should have gone, but what you're talking about is a lot more passive. It's just about respect.
Yeah.
It's not about anyone getting hurt or humiliated, but, it depends on the degree to which it's happened. Just on that point, you came back to the Bulldogs after, time at Parramatta and back in 2014, different role in the team then. What was that like for you?
I was so excited to be back at the club and get that opportunity, and unfortunately I got injured in the World Cup playing for Samoa, and I didn't really start the season until about 10 rounds in. I had a double groin reconstruction. Things were definitely different. Des had his own way of the way he saw the Bulldogs. I didn't find that it felt like a Bulldog culture. I didn't feel like I came back to the Bulldogs. Even though I wore the jersey, it was just a different vibe. And I don't want to go in on a Des. He just had his way of running the club and how he wanted it. I didn't agree with it. And but having said that, he still had that same Bulldog work ethic. I just don't think he understood the culture of the club. And also, but the teammates I had were great. I played with some really good players. There's 2 guys that I really respected, not only for the way they played, but their IQ for the game and what they did on the field, and the way they spoke before every game. And that was Michael Ennis and James Graham. I was the oldest in the team, I think, at that time. And when they would speak before a game, before that 2-minute bell, I listened. I was like inspired about what they brought and what they expected from their teammates. And, obviously I would have loved to have played in the grand final. It would have been 10 years since we won the grand final in 2004. But I think because I threw a punch in the semi-final and nearly got us beat by Manly, I don't think Des was too happy, and he picked me as 18th man. And it was it was a nice way to finish my career in the NRL as an 18th man in a grand final, but it would have been nice to play.
Have you spoken about the pattern of fours at the Bulldogs before on this show?
We haven't, no, but I'm aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So 84,
Yeah.
we win. 94, we make it and lose. 2004, we win. 2014, we make it and lose. 2024, you do the math.
Yeah. You left out 74. Yeah. 74. Which is in the pattern. Yeah. We lost the final in grand final in 74. Yeah. Incredible, isn't it? We had this thing where within 10 years, we'd win a premiership going back to...
That's pretty crazy, isn't it?
That's
Like,
kind
we're
of-
due next year. It seems like
Well,
pretty close now, but hey.
Stranger things have
A lot of
happened.
pressure on them now.
I'd love them to win, but I kind of still want to be in that last team that won it.
Yeah.
I don't think the fans are going to come on that one, mate. We'll, as I said, hopefully come back and spin some more stories with these guys. It's been wonderful. James, thanks for sharing some time with us, mate. We look forward to hearing you on SEN. And, of course, we didn't get a chance to talk about Dancing with the Stars, which is probably the most training you've ever done in your life.
I thought you were going to intro me as a dancer, but
Do you want to now change your...
disrespect?
James Magnussen, Phil Young, thank you so much, mate. And Reni Maitua, it's great to have you back. Thank you.
Cheers.
We'll have more Bulldogs Unleashed next week. Hope you've enjoyed this one. Bye for now.